Welcome, everybody. I'm very excited to be talking to all of you today, and we have thousands watching, and I'm excited to talk to you about my most passionate work that we've done in the last 30 years, I guess, and that is to help individuals who experience difficulty with language comprehension, both oral language comprehension and written language comprehension. Students come to us every summer with significant learning issues, and it is not only that they have difficulty decoding words, but it is also that they have difficulty comprehending. And sadly, the comprehension weakness is often something that goes misdiagnosed and looks as if they're not trying or paying attention. In the time that we have together today, I'm going to talk to you about cause and diagnosis and share research with you, neurological research that is substantiating the work that we're doing with comprehension. And it's for students that not only have weak comprehension, but for students that have been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders. I think that as we talk together, you'll see as a story unfolds that this is a significant area of concern, because if you look at this pipeline of kindergarten through 12th grade and you think of what happens to you when you leave 12th grade, you may go on to college or you may go on to a job. If you think about the most important thing that you'll be doing with that, it's either oral or written language comprehension. I know that we think that decoding is the most important thing that we do with reading, and I happen to agree that decoding is important, but what you'll be doing the most in your life is probably not decoding words. It is more than likely that you're going to be comprehending oral and written language and following directions. So as these students come to us, many of them have a situation where they hit third grade and their reading or language comprehension is below the third grade level. As they get to fifth grade, usually with very little reading instruction after, say, third grade, that gap can increase. And as they get to eighth grade, we have seen many students that are reading or comprehending many years below their potential or their grade level. And so this gap often widens. And what I want to talk to you about today is that we have the ability to diagnose and offer instruction that can change that learning significantly in a few weeks. So first of all, let's look at cause. What could be causing these weaknesses in language and literacy skills? Hang on. Well, technology is always going awry when I'm near it. So the first thing is cause, and if we're looking at what could be causing these weaknesses with language and literacy skills, what I'm saying to you here is that after 30 years of diagnosis, instruction, and research, we can tell you that the primary cause is at the sensory level. The brain can only process information through the senses. And the sensory input of imagery underlies competency in language and literacy skills, including comprehension. Fortunately for us, as we were working with students, we realized from our experience that we matched a theory of cognition, and that is called dual coding theory. It was masterfully thought of and created by Alan Pavio. And here's what Pavio said: performance is mediated by the joint activity of verbal and nonverbal systems. Nonverbal is imagery. And cognition is always an interplay between the verbal and the nonverbal systems. And then he also said in a different article, individuals differ in the extent, manner, and efficiency of employment of each of the systems according to their verbal and nonverbal habits and skills. And while it may seem like it's a mouthful, it's important for you to understand that what Dr. Pavio is saying is that there's an individual difference in the ability to integrate or have the interplay of the nonverbal and the verbal systems. I put this in this presentation because I think that it's significant and one of the most important things that Dr. Pavio wrote. He said, "I accept the obvious truism that language played a critical role in our giant leap as a species, but language never worked its magic alone, and it cannot do so now. Instead, it has always depended on a silent partner that provides it with something to talk about, a general cognitive system that had evolved to a high level before it invited language in as a co-player in the evolutionary scene. I see language as a benevolent, octopus-like parasite whose tentacles invaded the brain and was empowered by it to survive and thrive to the point where it could contribute something useful to its host. Nonverbal mind and verbal mind thus became interlocked in a synergistic relation that evolved into the nuclear power source of our intellect." I think that is a good way for you to be thinking of how we evolved with imagery, beginning with imagery, and then invited, as he said, language into the play. Pavio's not the only person that believes that imagery is part of cognition, and I could cite a lot of individuals about this. I wanted you to see this. I put this slide in here because, as many of you may know, Einstein has attributed his genius, a lot of his genius, to his ability to think creatively with imagery. And he says, quote, "If I can't picture it, I can't understand it." So my point in all this is that imagery is a sensory cognitive function. If the brain can only process sensory information, imagery is a sensory cognitive function that underlies language and literacy skills. However, there are individual differences in the ability to create mental representations for processing language. The first thing that I want you to know from this presentation, and if you saw the last webinar that I did on symbol imagery, you'll recognize these two slides. There are two types of imagery. It's not just that there are individual differences in imagery, but there are two types of imagery, and maybe type isn't the right word for it, but there are two kinds of imagery. There are two different ways that we create mental representations. One is, these are all related to language and literacy skills. One is symbol imagery, and the definition of that is the ability to create mental representations for the sounds and letters within words. And then concept imagery, the ability to create an image gestalt for both oral and written language. So I'm just going to quickly touch on symbol imagery. It is a phonological and orthographic image for decoding, and I'm going to have you experience this with me just for a second. I'm going to show that to you on the screen, and then I'm going to take it away and ask you a question to see if you could hold that orthographic image in your mind. What was the fourth letter that you pictured? So if you have good symbol imagery ability, you've still got that in your mind, and you can be thinking F-L-I-S-P. Did you get it? Now, again, I'm going to show you just a couple of slides on why that's important. First of all, we've thought for a long time, maybe not a long time, but Pat Lindamood started all of our thinking, was one of the pioneers in thinking about phoneme awareness. She called it auditory conceptualization, as phoneme awareness as critical for decoding skills. And so we did a lot of phoneme awareness work early on, and we still do. It was important when we were looking at symbol imagery then to see, is there a relationship between symbol imagery and phoneme awareness? And there is a high correlation, this is a correlation, very large correlation between our symbol imagery test and our Lindamood auditory conceptualization test, our LAC test. There's also a large correlation between symbol imagery and Torgerson's tests, but not as large as with our test. And frankly, that's because our test is a better test. And now what we want to be looking at is if it's correlated to phoneme awareness, then that's all well and good. But how does it predict, or can it predict, reading and spelling skills? And this is with an N of 717 students that we looked at. And what we were doing here is using these tests, the SI test, the LAC test, and the Torgerson tests. The subtests were combined as a testing model to predict student performance in word attack, word recognition, spelling, reading rate, accuracy, and fluency. So the issue was, which of these tests, or did any of them, correlate or predict, not correlate, predict performance in these sub-skills of reading, word attack, word recognition, as I said. And the stepwise regression that we did, the SI test was the strongest predictor, so symbol imagery or orthographic processing, was the strongest predictor in every case. For example, in this one, word attack, the total testing model, these, predicted 52% of the variation. And of that, this is very interesting to me, and I assume it will be to you also, of that 52%, symbol imagery predicted 47% of the 52. And you can look across and see it predicted 58 of the 62, 56% of the 59, all the way across. It was more predictive of decoding, than phonological awareness. So enough said about that, but that form of imagery that I was talking about, symbol imagery, is definitely related to decoding. But all that I want to talk to you about, the focus of today, is about comprehension. So we're now the rest of this presentation will be looking at videotape of some students, a student, a high school student, and talking about this type of imagery. So concept imagery is creating an imaged gestalt, or a whole, for language comprehension. And so you can see that that's different than this one, where he's imaging letters, than that what I have shown you here, where she's imaging concepts. And I'm going to have you experience that with me just for a moment. This is where the red fern grows, and I chose this because it's high in imagery and also something that you're probably familiar with. And let me read it to you and see if you're creating mental representations for the concept, not the words. That evening, when I came in from the fields, she was gone. Obviously, we're talking about little Anne. I hurried up the hollow, calling her name. I called and called. I found her lying on her stomach, so make sure you're picturing this. I found her lying on her stomach, her hind legs stretched out straight, and her front feet folded back under her chest. She had laid her head on his grave. I saw the trail where she had dragged herself through the leaves. I called her name. She made no movement. With the last ounce of strength in her body, she had dragged herself to the grave of old Dan. Joked up. But I hope that with the emotion that gave you, that you also saw that you were creating some mental representations, and that's what concept imagery is. So, as interesting as it is for us to be thinking about imagery and its relationship to reading, I want you to be now aware of how imagery fits into the component parts of reading. These sensory cognitive functions that I've been talking to you about underlie the necessary component parts of reading. For example, all of us have to have this to be independent readers. We have to be able to sound out a word that we've never seen before. And we also have to be able to recognize words so that we don't have to sound out every word on the page. And we have to be able to read in context and apply our vocabulary skills with our contextual reading. All of these are subsets of the greater set of comprehension. But all of these, let me make this point, all of these are necessary to be an independent reader. So it's a fallacy to think that, well, if I have a student that can't sound out words, I'm going to teach that student to memorize words in place of that. It's the student, unless he can sound out or she can sound out a word that she's never seen before, hasn't memorized, she's not going to be independent in reading. She's going to require somebody to be standing there and telling her what the word is. So I'm saying to you straight up, it is not accurate that we can, in the field of reading, teach to a strength. Because if you have one of these that is not well developed, you're not going to have an independent reader. So imagery in the language processing spectrum. If we talk about symbol imagery and concept imagery, now we need to see it in a spectrum of reading with the reading circles in between. So if you have a student that has weak symbol imagery, that is likely to lead you to weakness in decoding that could be difficult. It could be difficult enough for you to be labeled dyslexic. So these inner circles, word attack, word recognition, and paragraph reading, are related to symbol imagery. But concept imagery, over here, weak concept imagery, where you can't create those mental representations, is related to a distinct weakness in language comprehension, both oral and written. And if it's severe enough, it is going to possibly have you be labeled with hyperlexia. And many of you may not know what that is, and I will show you as we go on. Or it's hyperlexia, if you want to think of it right now, it's the opposite of dyslexia. Or you could be thought of or labeled on the spectrum. So let's take a look at concept imagery and comprehension. And here's our reading circles that I'm going to be talking to you about all the way along. Obviously, this one is related to the greater set of comprehension. Here's your question. This is what I want you to be thinking about. Is reading comprehension just a matter of oral vocabulary and accurate and fluent decoding? There are people that will make the argument, if someone has good oral vocabulary and can read accurately and fluently, they should be able to comprehend. Those are the critical pieces for language comprehension. So I want you to be answering that question in your mind. And that leads me to this. I want you to be thinking that there is a separate comprehension weakness, just like there's a separate decoding weakness. The issue is that the comprehension weakness is more difficult to diagnose. So let me talk to you about a student that I worked with many years ago. And I haven't talked about her in a while. And when I was putting these slides in, it all flooded back to me, all the imagery of sitting across from Michelle. Michelle was 17 years old when I saw her. She was in 12th grade. It was in December of 12th grade. Her Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test was at a 17-year-old mental age level, and so that meant that she was in normal range in oral vocabulary. Yet, if you look at, and when I did the diagnostic testing, let me tell you one other thing before I go to her scores. Michelle was dropping out of high school in 12th grade, and I got a phone call from her teacher asking if I could do some diagnostic testing and find out why she was possibly struggling so much in school. And when I asked the teacher what she thought it was, she said, I just don't think that really she's motivated, but I know that you do diagnostic testing, and I want to make sure that that's right. She's not turning in assignments, etc. She's flunking tests. So in the diagnostic testing, the first thing that I looked at was word attack, then her word recognition, then her paragraph reading. And you can see that all of those are above the 12th grade level. So the next question, of course, was what was happening to her in school. And these things are all what I noted when I was sitting across from her. She had difficulty making eye contact with me. Now, she was not labeled anything. She was not labeled on a spectrum. She was not labeled hyperlexic. They did not have a testing file on her. Parents had not been called in to discuss any issues with her. She was not in SPED. She was not in special education. In 4th grade, her parents were told that she needed to go to a reading class for her comprehension. And she was in SRA. I think she did the magenta and the turquoise and all of those. But basically what that was doing was giving her paragraphs to read, which she could read easily, and I'll show you that a little bit more in the next slide. But all it was doing was testing her reading comprehension. So when I looked at the greater set here of comprehension, and that must be the question you're asking yourself, what was her comprehension like? This was it. Her reading comprehension was at the 9th percentile. All of these were at the 90th percentile. So you can see that Michelle had an enormous gap between her ability to read the words and her ability to comprehend. But it's worse than you can imagine. One of the tests that we were using at the time was an old gray oral reading test where the questions are not a multiple choice. You don't have multiple choice. You have to give an open-ended answer to the question. And I wrote this, and I'll read it to you. Michelle quickly and easily read graded paragraphs from high school through the adult level passages. However, she answered, I don't know, to each question. I went back, since she was not answering, she was getting 0 out of 4 at the high school level, 0 out of 4 at the college level, even she could read the words perfectly. I went back through the passages to diagnose where her recall would stabilize, because what I wanted to understand was what was happening to her. If you think about K through 12, this girl has made it all the way to 12th grade. What I was tasked with was diagnosing why was she dropping out of high school and what was happening to her. So I asked her, I went back to the 8th grade paragraph. She read it beautifully. I asked her the questions, and she answered 0 out of 4. I went to the 6th grade paragraph, 0 out of 4. Went to the 5th grade paragraph. She read it aloud easily and accurately. 4th grade, 0 out of 4. 3rd grade, she finally got 2 out of 4. And at the 2nd grade paragraph, she got 4 out of 4. And her eyes filled with tears when we got to that paragraph, and she said, she made eye contact with me. And honestly, it's just like I'm sitting there with her across from me as I'm talking to you. I remember her looking at me saying, I don't understand what I read. And I asked her, do you study for your tests? And she said, yes, but I have to read things 3 and 4 times, and after I read it, I still don't understand it. So Michelle is a classic example of what I want you to come away with an understanding of today. And that is that for many individuals, young and old, some of your friends, language can go in one ear and out the other. And it can be from oral language or written language. And when I was first looking at this, I thought maybe Michelle didn't get anything. But and the more I looked at it with other students, what I realized is that they were getting parts, bits and pieces, facts. So I know you've seen these students. They can hear conversation, they can read something, they can remember the date, or they can remember a name, but they don't get the big picture. So what was happening to her is she didn't have any way for anything to go up there and stop and create some mental representations. So imagery, your take-home message is, imagery is a sensory cognitive function that prevents language from going in one ear and out the other. So as that language comes in, it needs to go up there and a gestalt is created. Now the next question you should be asking yourself is, why does Nanci care? If it's a gestalt, why did that matter? Well, because you want to make sure that if you're asked to read something or listen to a language, that you can understand the main idea, what are called higher order thinking skills. You can draw an accurate conclusion, not an erroneous conclusion. An erroneous conclusion can be drawn from getting facts and not the big picture. You want to be able to make an inference, predict and extend and evaluate. And all of these higher order thinking skills require the ability to have the gestalt. You cannot do these from just a bit or a part. Got it? Okay, so what are the symptoms of this? If I'm right, and I can tell you I'm right, that you have to be able to create the mental representations that Dr. Pavia was talking about and integrate that imagery with verbal processing. If you can't do that, and you have the individual difference where you can't, then there are symptoms from that weakness. And obviously, it's weak language comprehension for what you read, but also for what you hear. But it also tracks into critical and logical thinking, the ability to follow directions. This was really interesting for us. It also is expressing language succinctly, whether it's oral, expressing it orally or in written form. This was very interesting for me when I was first uncovering some of this. It is an individual like Michelle would have difficulty grasping humor because lots of humor is language-based, and a lot of what you do when you're thinking something is funny is you create mental representations for that. The humor that she could get would be physical humor, like a pie in the face, slipping on a banana, or food in your teeth, okay? This one is another one that was interesting for us. It is interpreting social situations. I was just talking yesterday about a young girl that we did some diagnostic testing because she's having lots of difficulty in school. She's having trouble with social situations. She has no friends. And when the consultation was done with her parents, both parents had a similar issue and could not understand what we were talking about and said, well, we're not going to put money into this daughter to bring her for private school. She goes to a private school, or to you for private tutoring, because she's just not trying. Now, this is after the testing consultation, after looking at a Michelle. We're going to put our savings into our other two girls that are doing well in school. So their daughter, their first diagnosis was that she wasn't doing well in school, but the next one that they're very concerned about is she has difficulty with interpreting social situations, cause and effect, mental mapping, and I think this is extremely important for students that are on the spectrum, that they have difficulty responding to a communicating world, because honestly, that's what you have to do to get by in your life. You have to be able to interact and communicate. So, how do you diagnose for these? The first thing that you need to do is do a learning ability evaluation to identify strengths and weaknesses and recommend appropriate instruction to change a weakness into a strength. So obviously you're going to be looking at a whole profile of a student. You're going to be saying to yourself, is this student having difficulty with decoding words, those inner circles, or is a student going to be having trouble with the greater set of comprehension, or possibly both? So here's what our learning ability evaluations look like. They take about 4 hours. And this is, we look at standard scores, percentiles, age equivalents, and grade equivalent, do a variety of tests. And then once we get all that testing done, then we start to look at that profile and see if we can diagnose what kind of differentiated instruction we need to do. So here's a girl that I worked with from the United Kingdom. She was 11 years old and in 6th grade, and she'd experienced difficulty. When her father called me, what he told me was that she had experienced lots of difficulty in school. She had difficulty following directions. She had never dreamed, or she had lost the ability to dream. It appears that she lost that ability to dream after she had an accident. But largely, what had happened to her is that she was labeled as somebody who wasn't motivated, wasn't paying attention. And the most recent thing they had done with her is they had moved her to the front of the class. So you're going to be doing some diagnosis with me. And if you think of percentiles, they go first percentile to 99th, 50th is in the middle. Anything 25th to 75th is considered normal range of function. So down below the 25th percentile, you'll see that that's a weakness for an individual. Let me erase this for a second with my magic pen. So if Natalie's Peabody, her receptive oral vocabulary, was at the 86th percentile, then obviously that's a strength. Her word attack skills, right here, a strength, completely available to her. Fill that circle in. Her word recognition skills, 86th percentile, obviously good. Her ability to follow directions, 37th percentile, not as much of a strength as the other ones. It's within the normal range. Now we want to look at How does she read? It's this circle. How does she read in paragraphs? And you can see that her reading rate, her accuracy, and her fluency are excellent. So those are all available to her. The only thing left is how is she in comprehension? And there she is. So now you can see that she had a separate comprehension weakness that was not easily diagnosed, because when she reread stuff over and over or asked questions over and over, it just looked like she wasn't paying attention. This is another student that I worked with. This was a student from the East Coast. He had a twin. He had learned to read words at a very early age. In fact, by the time he was 3 and 4 years old, he could sit and read books. Later, when I saw him, I think I saw him when he was, I guess, the end of 3rd grade. I was my first contact with him. And then the testing that you're going to see was when he was in 4th grade. He was diagnosed with hyperlexia. So see if you can tell why. There's his Peabody, there's his word attack, great shape. There's his word recognition, all filled in. And he has the ability to understand the meaning of those words. Oops, following oral directions, 25th percentile, significantly off these. Here he is reading in paragraphs, 95th percentile. 16th percentile in reading comprehension. And that's why he was labeled hyperlexic. So let's look at hyperlexia. Since usually when I make a presentation and I ask how many people, if I have 400 or 500 people listening to me, raise your hand if you've heard the term dyslexia, and everybody raises their hand. Raise your hand if you know what hyperlexia is. 10 people can raise their hand. So I want to make sure that you're understanding hyperlexia and its relationship to autism spectrum disorders. Hyperlexia is defined as the discrepancy between word reading ability and comprehension. Hyperlexics are usually unable to comprehend large units of meaning. All of this must seem familiar to you now as you look at what was happening to Michelle. Those words were coming in. She could read them easily, had the vocabulary for them, but she was getting bits, facts, parts. And that's exactly what was happening to Matthew. If I take you back and you can look at the 16th percentile compared to how well he could read the passages. But now let's look at hyperlexia and autism, because I have some research to show you about autism and some data to show you about autism. Students that we worked with that have been previously diagnosed that before they came to us. Hyperlexia, and autism spectrum disorders share symptoms that correspond to strength and weakness in imagery, and this is important for you, in the processing of parts and wholes. So students that have been diagnosed with autism usually they're good at processing parts. So they are good at rote memory and mechanical facts, acquisition of simple information, simple procedural tasks, simple associations. Usually, by the way, they're good at word recognition and spelling, and short-term rote computational tasks and short-term immediate repetition of oral material. Now let's see what happens when you have weakness processing wholes. This weakness in processing the gestalt, often these students are poor at processing complex information, concept formation, abstract and critical thinking, interpreting oral language comprehension and written language comprehension, following complex oral and written directions, problem solving, analysis and synthesis, organizational strategies, and pragmatics, understanding social situations. And I'm sure you've seen these students, and I know that you're aware of these symptoms. So I'm not going to dwell on this slide, but I decided to put this one in there because I want you to be thinking what might be happening in our culture to contribute to weak concept imagery. So these are the students I've been talking to you about. What we think is maybe genetic, but also we think that weakness in forming concept mental representations could be driven by what's happening in our culture. I'll give you a clue. My dad listened to radio shows. I'm not so old that I was only aware of radio, but I lived out in a ranch, and we didn't have television for, I don't know, quite a while. And when we did have it, we only had a few channels. And so I read a lot of books. I did listen to one radio show, and it was Roy Rogers. And one of the things that I want you to be aware of when you're listening to radio, not only is that only language that comes in, but that language usually is made more vivid with sound effects. So it could be trigger running on the ground or the guns going off. And all of that, I think, helped my mental representations, along with the books thousands of books that I read, hundreds of books that I read, that were creating mental representations for me. But what do you think is happening with the amount of TV now? If television is there, those mental representations are being made for you. And I guess I don't need to talk to you about the handheld devices and the people sitting. We can go to a restaurant and see people that never speak to one another, and they're always on their device. And I'm sure you can think of more of these. But I think that we're making this problem, we're worsening this. If it is genetic, I think that we are in a culture where we could be causing some atrophy of our ability to create mental representations. So if all of that is true, what are we going to do about it? And I'm going to talk to you now about imagery, language, instruction to activate the nonverbal and verbal code, the dual coding that Pavia was talking about. So at Lindamood-Bell, I'm just going to show you quickly that we do a lot of programs. The one I'm talking to you about today, we do a lot of instruction. We do scene stars, we do lips, Lindamood phoneme sequencing, we do talkies, which is for students that we can't do regular visualizing, verbalizing with, and we do a math program. So if you look at the types of students that we have in our learning centers, this is an N of 13,000 that we've just looked at currently. And you can see that for decoding only, the majority of our students come in because they refer to us for decoding work. And obviously, that's an easier thing to diagnose. It's easier to tell when somebody's having trouble reading a word if they look at breakfast and say basket. And that's easy. It's easy to see that. It's much more difficult to see the students who are having just pure comprehension problems, which are down here. So 42% versus 28% for decoding only and comprehension only. But what I want to point out about this, these students over here got comprehension support, and these students over here got comprehension support. So a lot of our students are getting work with comprehension. When we start to do all that diagnostic testing, we see that a lot of students have difficulty with comprehension. Maybe not the only thing that they have trouble with, but they also need work with it. So if you think of the students that I was talking to you about, I want to show you that as they come in so far behind, I want to show you some data that we just pulled from our database on 1,300 students that were below the 25th percentile in word recognition. And there's kindergarten through 12th grade. This is the grade level. Look how this gap widens for these students the older they get. So by the time we see students that are in here, they're years and years and years below. Same thing with comprehension. Here's third grade. By the time they're in sixth grade, this gap is huge. This is a 5-year gap, 5 years below. They're 7 years below by the time they get here. So what we need to do to make a difference for these students that come to us in the summer, and we only have maybe 5 or 6 weeks with them, we do intensive intervention to change the rate of learning in a short period of time. So it's one-on-one, 4 hours a day. 5 days a week. And when we do that, we can actually change this rate of learning in weeks. So here, I'm going to show you now what we do for that. We're going to talk about Sophie. Sophie is a quiet, shy little girl. She performs at a high school level. We're thinking of these circles. These are all intact for her, these inner ones. Her oral vocabulary is within normal range, and her paragraph reading down here is the 90th percentile. Her reading comprehension is the 5th percentile, and her ability to follow directions is at the 16th percentile. So if you think back to Michelle, when I saw Michelle, she was in 12th grade. When I'm now working with Sophie, she's in 6th grade. I can't imagine how much different Michelle's life would have been had we been able to work with her when she was in 6th grade instead of waiting until she was in 12th grade. Here's more information on Sophie. By 3rd grade, Sophie's parents were told she wasn't attending and she wasn't completing assignments at school. By 5th grade, the same complaints continued, but they added that Sophie wasn't motivated. And that was because they weren't trying to misdiagnose. They were simply misdiagnosing it. They didn't know what was happening with her. By 6th grade, Sophie began to complain of stomach aches before she went to school, and by this time she began to tell her parents that she was dumb. So what I'm going to talk to you about now are the steps of visualizing and verbalizing that were created from our experience working with students. We did not look at a bunch of cognitive theory and say, oh, well, that must be the reason. Instead, we worked with students one-on-one, year after year, year after year, year after year, and tried to fill in the blanks for ourselves, connect the dots. What was it that these students were not able to do that we were able to do? And from that experience, we met that dual coding theory and realized that what we were seeing matched that theory. And what I'm going to show you now with VV brings the nonverbal code of imagery, and I talk about this when I'm teaching workshops. We want to bring that imagery to consciousness. We want to bring it to consciousness for comprehension, for critical thinking, and for memory. So in order to do that, to bring it to consciousness, we have to use language, and I would hope that after this you'll start to use the same language at home, and that is ask questions about what do those words make you picture. Or if you are telling a story, say to the person next to you, well, what do you picture from that? If you're talking with children in a classroom, instead of saying, what do you think the meaning of that word is, say, what are you picturing for that word? You want to bring that sensory input to consciousness. So here are the steps. I'm going to go through this quickly, but I want you to see that you can actually take something that's weak and make it strength. They go from verbalizing a picture to visualizing a page and applying that imagery to higher order thinking skills. So that's what I'm going to show you. In picture to picture, the first thing that I have to do is make sure that the student can verbalize from a given picture, because I'm going to ask them to verbalize from their imagery. And when I first started working on these steps, I thought if I just said to a student like Michelle, hey, just make pictures when you read, well, it wasn't that easy. She couldn't do it because she had a weakness in sensory input. So it wasn't whether she wanted to, it was that she couldn't do it without some direct stimulation. So then I realized that I maybe wanted to say a word to her, first a sentence, then go back to a word. What are you picturing for this word? And when she couldn't tell me what she was picturing, I didn't know if it was that she didn't have an image or that she couldn't describe something. So the first step is having the student verbalize from a given picture. So I'm saying to Sophie, you look at the picture, you tell me about the picture, and your words are going to create an image in my mind. So she knows that she's going to look at all that detail, and what comes out of her mouth, I'm going to visualize. I'm not looking at the picture, she's just looking at it, and I say to her, what is is this a picture of? An elephant, a bird? And she says, a boy. And that's about all she would say. And then now I have to question her because this is very likely going to be difficult for her. And so I ask questions like, a white duck, should I picture him, notice that, should I picture him standing or sitting in the water? And by asking her those questions, I'm forcing her to give me more detailed verbalization. He's standing partly in the water she's looking at, and he has 2 feet. And so because I need to get as much detail as I can from her, I present what we call structure words that make sure that she gets these details in there, conceptual pegs of color and movement, size, etc. So after I've questioned her as much as I can, then I say to her, go through those structure words and make sure you got everything. So she's got the picture she's looking at. I'm not seeing the picture yet. And she points the picture to the structure word and she says, well, okay, that's what? Well, this was about a little boy looking at a duck. Well, the color is whatever, white or blue, water, etc. So she goes through the structure words and she's getting detailed verbalization. Then I say, great, your words made me picture. Now, when I'm saying that to Sophie, she has to compare my verbalization to the picture that she sees in front of her. And that's, in essence, what we do with picture-to-picture. So the next thing that we need to do then is take her verbalizing skills here and apply it to visualizing and verbalizing. So the smallest unit of language is a word. And so you want to start with a word. So this is called word imaging, and I'm going to say to Sophie, here's a word clown. You want to make sure that you're using a high imagery word. What does that word make you picture? And I cannot tell you how many times I've had a student sit across me and go, a clown, a clown. And so what is that telling you? That probably she doesn't have vivid imagery. If I asked you, what are you picturing for a clown? You're probably going to have a bunch of imagery that you will be able to do. So I now have to question, and I question with choice and contrast. Help me know what you're picturing. Start at the top and go down. He has a hat on. She's trying to get some images up there. It's a little in black. And so the next question I might say is, well, what color does he, what color is his face? What color, how big are his feet, etc. I'm trying to help her create that imagery. Once she gets going, see that? What are you picturing for his face? He has a big white face, a big nose. Then she goes to the structure words to make sure that she's got that all pictured. So we've got this image up here. I picture a big clown, little hat. She's going through each one of these. And then I say back to her, your words made me picture. And now what she's doing as I talk, she's comparing what I'm saying to her own imagery. So we've got this back and forth, this interplay of nonverbal and verbal processing. The next step is to take one word and apply that to a sentence. And so if we do something like clown, we can make a simple sentence, say that the clown is dancing on a big ball. But often you can skip that step and go right to the heart of VV, which is sentence by sentence. So if you recall me talking about the Gestalt, when you want to do sentence by sentence, because that's going to help them create a Gestalt of language, of images from connected language. So this is me doing sentence by sentence, and then I'm going to show you a little bit of video. So I can do sentence by sentence receptively or expressively, where expressive would be where she would read it, or I usually start with where I read it. So you take out decoding from the task. So I read something to her and say, what do those words make you picture? And she places a colored square for that first sentence. And I get as much imagery as I can for the first sentence, such as, what does your daytime look? I'm asking her questions to develop that imagery. And she checks the structures to make sure that she has the detail. And then I read the next sentence. And what you see down here are colored squares. This is the first sentence. This is the second sentence. This is the third sentence. This is the fourth sentence. And what I'm questioning her to do is to create that gestalt, that imaged gestalt. Or think of it this way, that imaged whole. Now, once I have that, then I do have her do what we call a picture summary. So Sophie's going to touch each one of those squares and say, "On here I saw," and then she's going to touch the next one and say, "Here I saw." See her doing that right there? She's saying, "Here I saw, blah, blah, blah. Here I saw." And what I have done is helped her create that whole. And then once I do that, then I pick all these up, I get rid of them, and I have her give me a whole summary. Now, I'm going to have you watch a video of Jake, and it's a receptive sentence by sentence. It's just a minute or so of it, a couple minutes. And he's a high school student. He's in 9th grade. I want you to see that he has a lot of difficulty visualizing and how I have to question for that. And just make a picture, and when you get that picture, put a colored square out there. This is one of my favorites. Long ago, right away that gives you some pictures.
Yeah.
Long ago, people liked to watch a soaped pig contest. What do those words make you picture?
Picture a pig.
That's good. So that's your first sentence right there.
Oh, that's it?
Mm-hmm. Then all those things that all those pictures that you have, we'll put on this one.
Long ago, a pig with a bunch of soap suds on it.
Okay, what's that look like? Those are just the words. Now you have to make sure I have the pictures for that.
Looks funny.
All right, what's a pig look like? If he's got soap on him, tell me what that looks like. I'll start with a pig.
He's confused. He doesn't know what to do.
So that means you're seeing him run this way and that way? What do you mean when you say he's confused?
He doesn't know what to do.
And what's it look like when you see him soaped?
Looks clean.
And so if he could be clean,
Yeah.
if he has soap on him, but I think that they mean that he's got soap all over him. So what would that look like? They may not even have washed him off yet. He just got soap all over him. Like somebody took a pig and they took a bar of soap and they ran soap or some sort of soap all over him. What would he look like? He'd
look lathered.
Great. What's it look like to be lathered? That's exactly the word I was thinking.
He's got a film of soap on him, but it's not rinsed away yet.
Okay. Let's go on to sentence by sentence with higher order thinking skills. Now, of course, we have that gestalt, and we're applying that to critical thinking. All the same. Read the sentence and tell me what those words make you picture. And she says the bravest man in the rodeo is the one dressed up as a clown. I picture a clown in a rodeo. He has big pants. He has a big hat. He has big red pants. And so you can see that her imagery is getting better and better now. And she has a picture summary. Here I saw. She can go through all of that. Then she does a word summary. Well, when a cowboy gets bucked off, a bull in a rodeo. So now I've gotten the word summary out of her. Now I know that she has a gestalt. And now I can start asking higher order thinking questions from her imaged gestalt. From what you pictured, why do you think the clown might be braver than the cowboy? And she accesses her imagery, that nonverbal code. Remember, the integration, the interplay between verbal and nonverbal. Well, I think he was braver because he got right in front of the mean bull and the cowboy ran away. And she can answer those why questions because of her imagery. So the next thing, since this is only sentence by sentence, what would you do next? We don't live in a world where somebody reads a sentence to you and gives you time to visualize it, then reads the next sentence and gives you time to visualize it. So the next thing is to create, moving slowly, have her create that imagery with more than one sentence. Because that's what's happening to you even as you're listening to me speak. I'm saying sentence after sentence after sentence, and you, in order to comprehend this, you have to have the cognitive ability to create mental representations for all of that I'm saying fast. So here's what that would look like. I'm going to read something to her. People in Cambodia think fried jungle spiders make a tasty snack. And I read more than one sentence, and then I say to her, what do those words make you picture? And she says, ugh, I don't like spiders. But now she's taking multiple sentences in. So this colored square represents 2 or 3 sentences. I'm just increasing the amount of language. And I asked for details. What do you picture for Cook squeezing out the venom, the poison? Are they doing that with their hands? Or I'm just making sure that she's imaging. We're on the second sentence down here. And then I ask her for a word summary. This story is about how people eat big hairy spiders they catch in the jungle. Now I know she's got an image gestalt. What's the next thing I'm going to do? It's not enough to have an image gestalt. She has to apply that over to higher order thinking skills. So I start asking questions. If the poison was still in the imagery, what might you picture, not think about, what might you picture happening? And she says, if the poison was in the spider, I picture people eating the spiders and then dropping over dead. So the next is a whole paragraph. And obviously, we're taking sentence by sentence, then we're taking 2 sentences at a time, and now we're taking a whole paragraph. And I'm going to have you watch a video of Jake where you see that he has definitely improved in his ability to create mental representations. Now we are to a whole paragraph of imaging and higher order thinking skills, obviously. But what I want you to notice about this step is that now we do no structure words. Now we do no picture summary because the student is either receiving an entire paragraph receptively or they're reading it expressively and taking in the language to be imaged and dual coded. When you do a whole paragraph, after you have the student image the gestalt, the very next thing you do is have them give you a word summary. So you just turn to the student or the students and have them give you a word summary, and then you ask to check specific imagery. So for example, you might say, that was a great word summary. Now, what did you visualize for this part? And what did you visualize for that part? And the reason that you're doing that is you want to make sure that the students are still imaging and not just paraphrasing back the paragraph. Okay, we're going to do a whole paragraph.
Okay.
And you're really getting good at this imaging stuff. Is it getting easier for you?
Yeah.
A lot easier.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it is a lot easier. How about school?
It's doing good. My reading's a lot easier, and I've been learning a lot of stuff. And when I do my tests on the novel, I can remember a lot more stuff than I used to.
Great. You picture it when you read?
Right.
Do you? For real?
Yeah, I tried with the hagfish one that we did last week.
Mm-hmm.
It was really easy for me.
Yeah. And so like when you read in history and stuff?
Yeah.
Can you picture what's happening?
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's a good thing. This is going to be another history one.
Okay.
And this is 12th grade. And what grade are you in? Ninth grade. So let's try this one.
All right.
And I'm going to read it to you. Well, maybe I'll let you read this one.
Okay.
I'll let you read it, and you're going to read the whole paragraph. This is what we haven't done before.
Right.
You read the whole paragraph, and just give me a word summary. Okay, out loud.
All
I'm going to have to try to visualize with you.
Okay. Throughout history, some clever tricks have been used by secret agents to send messages. Sometimes secret agents have carried messages in a tiny aluminum tube hidden in a shoestring. Once, the secret messages were simply strokes made on an embassy window by the window cleaner. In another case, the stitches in clothing formed the dots and dashes of its telegraph code. In the ancient times, a famous English agent went about the fort catching butterflies. He sketched the outline of the fort and its guns on the wings of the butterflies he captured. Okay, all right. Just give me a word summary. Not just what you pictured, but just tell the whole thing back as much as you can. All right. People have used different ways of communicating secretly so that they can secret codes back and forth. Mm-hmm. Like they used an aluminum tube and they put it in their shoestring, and it's just like clothing. Mm-hmm. And they use stitches to make the dashes and the dots of Morse code. Mm-hmm. And they even used the wings of butterflies to show out the layouts of forts and guns and stuff.
Who did that? It gave us a
Old
clue.
Englishman.
Yeah, an Old Englishman. There was one other thing in there that I was visualizing that I wonder if you pictured that part about embassies.
Oh yeah,
You picture that part?
yeah, like for window cleaners.
What'd they do?
They wrote it on the window.
Great. Now, that was a word summary.
Mm-hmm.
Now what I do with this part is I just make sure that you actually had pictures. I just check some images.
Okay.
Like, what did you picture for that part about the shoestring, that first part?
I pictured, like, you know, the tip of the shoelace that's usually hard.
Yeah.
They put an aluminum tube instead of that part so that
That's good.
it hold the message.
Why wouldn't they have put it in the entire shoestring?
Because you have to tie the shoestring and the message could be damaged.
Then paragraph by paragraph, and then finally to a page. Just quickly, here's what it looks like. You're increasing that language. After you read a paragraph, just give me a word summary, and then we'll go on to the next paragraph. Got it? And she says, I've got it. And I check some images. This is paragraph by paragraph here. And she says, here I saw, and she's got the whole paragraph visualized. And then I say to her, now see if you can give me a page summary. She says, the whole page, all those paragraphs? Yes, those colored squares will help you sequence the story. And so she uses her imagery and she goes through a page word summary. And I can ask higher order thinking skill questions of her of that. And then a whole page. And I say, let's do a whole page, and she reads a whole page. Great, give me a page summary. And she has all of these imaged, and she can give me a succinct, detailed summary. This is about a ship called the Endurance trying to get to Antarctica. The ship got caught in the ice. Shackleton took a lifeboat to get help. They climbed an icy mountain. And she says, I wonder how long it took them. And then I can start asking higher order thinking skill questions. From your images, why do you think they climbed a mountain of ice? Why not climb on any old ice? And she says, a mountain of ice might be less likely to break. She's accessing this imagery. Well, wait, they might, if they were up high, maybe someone would see them more easily. So in the end, this is what she actually said. I just see everything when I read. I mean, I see it really fast. I can't describe it. I just picture everything. And I want you to know this is when you see students have a breakthrough moment when they say, I make a movie when I read. That it comes that fast for them. So let's just see what happens now if you apply all of those steps to research. So this is us looking at our decoding only students and our comprehension only students. An N of 5,569, 3,726. And what you can see here, and it's important that you get this, that every student is not a VV student. You might have students that are decoding only students. And so that's this composite of students, of these 5,000. They came in, and the mean was they were at the 16th percentile in decoding, but at the 42nd percentile in comprehension. So you can see the weakness was in decoding, and that's why they were decoding only students. The comprehension only students are the exact opposite. Their decoding was at the 58th percentile, and their comprehension was at the 23rd. If you look at the decoding students, here they are in symbol imagery, phoneme awareness, word attack. You can look at their profile and see how low all these subsets are that I was talking to you about with the reading circles. But you can see that their comprehension and vocabulary, all good. Exactly the opposite for comprehension only students. If you look at their symbol imagery, their word attack, their reading rate, their accuracy, their fluency, and then their comprehension drops off, and there's no reason for that comprehension to be off in anything that you can see on that testing, because their vocabulary is high, their ability to read accurately is high, much higher than their comprehension. But I'm really worried not just about the students that have a little bit of trouble or a mild amount of trouble. I'm worried about the students that we see come to us in the summer that have this just shows that the gains after 99 hours of VV. Those comprehension-only students went from the 25th percentile to the 47th percentile. What I really want to show you are the students that came in that had what we would call, they were severe. All these students are at or below the 25th percentile in reading comprehension, but these students would look more like Matthew the twin, where he was reading so high. So this is word recognition at the 75th percentile and comprehension at the 25th percentile. So an enormous gap. And those are the students I've categorized as severe. So if we look what happens to them when we pretest them, you can see how high they are here and how low, and you should be gasping at how low they are in reading comprehension. If you have a student that can read accurately and fluently at the 58th and 66th percentile and have oral vocabulary within the normal range, and yet they're functioning at the 8th percentile in language comprehension, they're in a lot of difficulty in school and probably in their life as they're interacting socially. So let's see what happens to those students. This is after 102 hours of dual coding work, if you want to think of it that way, with VV. Their comprehension was at the 8th percentile, oral directions at the 10th, word opposites at the 34th, vocabulary at the 39th. Get set. We're going to see what happened to them after 102 hours. And that should make you gasp. These are all great, but this one is truly life-changing. And that's significant, statistically significant. And if you look at we took the same students and looked at them in terms of standard score changes, anything that we've colored purple is a large, extremely large standard score change, and that certainly is. Now let's see what happens when we look at the students that come to us with a prior diagnosis of being on the spectrum. This is an N of 510. You can see what I said earlier, many of these students they're functioning in normal range in the subsets, word attack, word recognition, etc. And their spelling was, however, at the and their comprehension was at the 7th percentile. Their ability to follow directions was at the 3rd percentile. The difference between these students that came to us identified with ASD is that they did not have the strength in oral vocabulary that the students had that weren't previously diagnosed. But still, after 127 hours of VV, you can see that we got statistically significant gains in comprehension and oral directions, and medium standard score gains in vocabulary. We did a research project on memory and imagery, and right now we're talking with a prominent university about doing a memory study. With this is what we have done in-house. This is an N of 25, so it's certainly not the big N that I've been showing you up to this point. The average hours of instruction was 112. And these are average standard score changes in the RAML, which is the Wide Range Assessment of Memory and Learning. And you can see that we got large standard score changes in story memory and verbal learning. Okay in picture memory, a small change in design memory. And this is the visual index, which is a composite of design, and this one is a composite of design and picture memory, and this one is a composite of story and verbal learning. And you can see that I think that what we're doing with VV clearly impacts memory. Now, we're almost to the end. I want to talk to you about neuroimaging research. And this is, I cannot tell you how exciting this is. I only saw yesterday the paper that has been accepted, and what is said in that paper about our work, our intervention, makes a lot of years of work worth it. This is with the University of Alabama at Birmingham, and the study was the impact of language remediation on brain functioning in autism. Dr. Khanna had been looking with others at what's called the underconnectivity hypothesis, and I decided to take a little bit of time and teach you about that because that's what was studied in this research. They examined the neurobiology of cognitive and language comprehension deficits found in individuals with autism. And what they believe is that individuals identified with ASD have an impaired ability to communicate from one cortical area of the brain to the other. This is an impaired conductivity in the white matter of the brain, the communication pathways, the axons, dendrites, and lipids of fatty tissue necessary to pass on signals from one area of the brain to the other. This was a randomized controlled study that examined the impact of VV, nonverbal and verbal, from what you would now know about DCT, on brain responses in children identified with ASD. We had 31 ASD students and 22 typically developing students, and we did 10 weeks, 4 hours a day, 5 days a week of VV. So that's the slide showing you the assessment. This is the pre-assessment in phase 1. This is the post-assessment. And this is the students getting the intervention in between. And the results, and I have to say I have difficulty reading this slide, but I'll tell you what I know from hearing Dr. Khanna talk about it. The results show an increase in brain connectivity during multi-sentence comprehension. Remember when I was making the point to you that it's not enough to know if Michelle could visualize a word. It is not enough to know if she could visualize a sentence. The issue is, can she take multiple sentences and bring them together? Because that's what we do in our life. And so if you look at the before and you look at the after, the color changes show hotter areas of communication over here between the cortical areas after VV intervention. And this is what is being concluded. The study revealed widespread changes in functional connectivity of the brain's reading network as a result of the VV intervention in children with ASD. The brain was more focused, there was more focused, specialized brain activity, and functional connectivity. The findings support the dual coding theory of cognition, the interplay between imagery and verbal processes. The VV intervention focused on imagery and language to develop oral and written language comprehension, and the paper has been accepted for publication in a neuroscience journal in 2015. It's, by the way, also being reviewed for a journal on ASD. So it's all very exciting for us. But as exciting as all of that is, what helps all of us that work at Lindamood-Bell get up every day and go to work is this. Imagery language instruction can result in unimaginable gains in language and literacy skills. So I'm going to talk you through some students where you're going to see a pre. Here's the pre-test. And here's the retest. This is after 80 hours. Cassius is his name. He's 6 years old. His Peabody coming in was fine. After 4 weeks, it's definitely significantly improved. Word opposites did not change, and I don't know. I have no explanation for that. Usually, you would expect that if this is this high, this would be that high. Word opposites is more difficult. It is actually having to verbalize. If I say up, you say down. If I say big, you say little, and it gets more complex. I have no idea what the testing showed. I haven't looked at those specific tests, but if you look at his ability to follow oral directions, it's stunning, really, from the 1st percentile to the 63rd percentile. Notice that he came in with strength in these inner circles. Everything that I've been saying to you. 50th percentile in reading rate, 37th percentile in accuracy, that all improved. His reading rate went down, but what's really important is to look at the difference between where he was in comprehension at the 5th percentile coming in to where he is exiting after 4 weeks at the 63rd percentile. If you really look closely at this, you might ask me, why do you think his reading rate decreased? And what do you think my answer is going to be? I think he's taking more time now to be able to comprehend, because he knows that when he reads, he's to make pictures he used to get meaning from what he reads, not just read words. Here's another student, an 11-year-old, 6 weeks, came in the 32nd and the 25th and the 16th on receptive vocabulary, expressive, and ability to follow directions, and these gains are significant. From the 25th to the 63rd in word opposites, this is the one that I think is life-changing. His ability to follow oral directions went from the 16th percentile to the 50th. Again, if you look at his incoming tests, he was really good. And his spelling was 99th percentile. All of these circles were intact. Reading rate was 63rd, accuracy 50th, fluency 50th, and this is the big one for me. He went from the 25th percentile to the 50th percentile in comprehension. And I included these. This is the phoneme awareness test and the symbol imagery test. Coming in, he didn't have any difficulty with that type of imagery. Here's an older student that we worked with, 16 years old. We saw her for 93 hours. She's in 11th grade. Her mental age, her age equivalent, oral directions was at the 63rd percentile, didn't change. But what did change significantly was her ability to comprehend language. She went from the 25th percentile to the 63rd. You can see that her incoming performance in contextual reading was the 91st percentile and the 84th percentile in fluency, and they did not guarantee her the ability to comprehend language. Now we're done. I have one other thing to say to you, that weak imagery, just to sum it, weak imagery results in weak language and literacy skills. There's absolutely a direct correlation to your ability to create mental representations for words and mental representations for concepts. And imagery language instruction can change that and improve what was a weakness, change it into a strength. What was weak, make it a strength. All those students that we see can, in my opinion, become independent if they can learn to self-correct, if they can monitor. You can't self-correct unless you can monitor, and you can't become independent unless you self-correct, and you can't do any of that, in my opinion, without the sensory input of imagery to enable you to monitor, self-correct, and become independent. We believe passionately that children and adults can be taught to read and comprehend. They do not have to be taught to compensate. Thank you very much.